Yes or no, if you've ever felt like on this journey as you're trying to overcome the coping skills, right, that we had to adapt to because of the trauma, if you ever felt like you had one foot on the gas and one foot on the brake, or if you felt like your thoughts, your feelings, or your actions didn't make sense, like your mind's like, this is what I want, and your body's doing this, or if you've ever felt stuck in a pattern where you start working on this pattern, you start breaking that pattern and it shows up in another way. The reason why those things tend to happen has to do with psychological muscle memory. In other words, we might be stuck in the patterns or the adaptations that were created when our survival was on the line. For example, some of those might be people pleasing, self blame, not having boundaries, stifling our feelings, feeling incapable of being in charge of our life, and the actions that we develop to stop us from doing those things. Those patterns that happened in childhood, they get stored in a part of our brain where it's implicit memory. Like we're not that child anymore. But anytime we face a situation that's similar, then that pattern or that sequence gets kicked on. And that's what winds up keeping us stuck. It might feel like I'm self-sabotaging my life. I can't. There's something wrong with me. But in reality, it's because of this implicit memory. So once our brain, I'm a big brain geek. So share a couple of things that I learned about the brain. Once our brain learns that pattern, it doesn't second guess it. In fact, it doesn't even ask our mind for its conscious consent. It just brings up the pattern. So for example, just to kind of bring it home to what that might look like. Imagine if when I was a child, anytime I tried to be myself or express my autonomy, if I was shamed, blamed, humiliated as a child, then as an adult, if I'm in a situation, let's say somebody asks my opinion about something simple, that's not danger, that's not trauma. That's a normal interaction. I might slip immediately into people pleasing without even realizing it because that pattern or that sequence kicks on. The brain's like, oh, someone's asking you to reveal your autonomy. Let's do what we did as a child. Let's fawn, stifle yourself and make them happy because that kept you alive, right? And it happens so fast, it's like a reflex. It's like muscle memory. Not choosing it, it just happens. Have you ever felt like these patterns are somehow out of your control? Like they happen like that. So that's how the brain learns. It learns things in a sequence, it memorizes those sequences, and then it stores them in our implicit memory, which, by the way, I don't want us to view the brain as the enemy. That's an awesome thing because we don't have to relearn every single thing. For example, reading, tying your shoes, riding your bike, playing an instrument, making a meal that you're familiar with, or driving home from work the same route, the brain has a sequence for. It learns that sequence so that you don't have to rethink every single thing every single time. So the brain isn't necessarily the problem, which, by the way, any of you guys, I know this happened with me. Have you ever driven home and gotten home and been like, who the heck was driving my car? There was your implicit memory kicking on. Okay. So it's not that the brain is the problem. The problem was that the coping skills or the adaptations that we developed as young children, they're what's calling the shots. And they happened or they were created by a child the age 6 or younger, right? Those first few years of life is when all those patterns and sequences were created. So at that time, we didn't have the knowledge or the maturity to know how to handle the chaos that we were going through in the best way for the long term. So the patterns and adaptations were awesome when we were kids. For example, if I'm going to get screamed at and shamed every time I speak up and show my real self, stifling me was smart to a 4-year-old. It was smart in childhood. It's just that now they're maladaptive. So as we start working with our different parts, our different pieces, we are in a way doing inner child work as well, which, by the way, I know I've had clients tell me, oh, Michele, the inner child, oh my goodness, that's so woo-woo. I don't get that. It doesn't make sense. Just in case you might feel that way, there is actually a science behind it. So for example, whatever neural firing pattern that got established when you were a child, that sequence that got memorized by the brain, when it kicks on in the present, it's like the brain is firing in the same way as it did when we were a child and when that sequence was created. And so in that moment, it's as if we are the child that created that template in that moment, which is why when we have emotional flashbacks, we feel very small. Have you noticed that as some of these patterns kick on, there's almost this thought like, I feel like a child at times. That's that neural firing pattern. When it kicks on from the age it was created. The reason I like or wanted to incorporate somatic parts work in Thrivers is because I know some of my pieces, some of my parts that were controlling my life, one, didn't really like very much. But two, I felt like they were like, is that who I am? And what somatic parts work helped me to learn and realize is that as we start seeing these pieces, we start realizing that they're just pieces. So I might have a piece that does something I don't like or feels in a way that I don't even agree with. But that's not all of who I am. So not any one piece makes up our sum total. It's just a part of the whole. And so as we really start working with our pieces in this way, we start unblending and unmeshing from them. In other words, when I didn't realize this was a piece of me, I felt like it was all of me. And you can't heal from that place because now I'm merged with that piece. So somatic parts work helps us to get some distance. And we need that distance because with our parts, they only know what they know. Unlike our present oriented awareness, we're always learning. We can watch a video on YouTube. We can read a book. We just learned more, right? We're always learning and processing more. Those pieces, that neural firing pattern stays exactly as it is each time it fires. It doesn't have new information. It's kind of like a computer program. Like if I have Word on my computer and I run Word, it's not like hanging out with Excel and Kajabi and they're all kind of getting together and learning together. No, it's just Word. It's just Kajabi. There's no interaction between the two. But when that sequence gets fired, it's just firing exactly as it did without any of the information and learning and growth that we've been doing in our conscious mind because it's part of our subconscious. So what's in our implicit memory stays rigid. And so as we start noticing it with distance, by being able to say, oh, this piece of me is doing this piece of me feels that. At that moment that we're doing that, the neural firing pattern is firing and our conscious mind is online. That's when things start to shift. So that's just the basics as to the value of why learning how to see ourselves in parts is helpful. And then we're going to continue to actually do it together.
Last piece you just said about the both pieces firing together. Can you say it again? It just went over my head. I was
Yeah,
still processing the stuff before.
perfect. Yes. So when a past sequence fires, it fires alone, right? Which is why it dysregulates us so much. It's like that old pattern of learning has just kicked on and we're right back to where we were at 6, 5, 4 when the pattern was created. However, when we start saying, oh, this piece of me is really criticizing me, this piece of me is wanting to stifle who I am, this piece of me is scared. When we're able to step into the witness of that neural firing pattern, now the firing pattern is there and our conscious mind is there as well. And that's when we can start changing things. Because the firing pattern we can't change because guess what? It's in our subconscious mind. We have to bring what's subconscious into our conscious awareness. We have to make it explicit. We need to see it. And now we can work with it. With that in mind, There was one other question. Is the neural pathway impacted or changed after 6 if abuse continues or is altered? For sure. So I'm using this because most of our maladaptive coping skills are there because of childhood. However, if you're an adult and you get involved in a toxic relationship, um, especially if you have certain, maybe not abuse in childhood, but neglect, um, you might be predisposed, right, to developing certain coping skills. So you get into a relationship as an adult, and if it's consistently every time this happens, that's classical conditioning. Your nervous system will get rewired. So it can happen even as an adult. I think it was maybe not last month it might have been the month before we talked about the importance of befriending our protective self or our protective pieces, right? I know with myself, I did not have a good relationship with my protective pieces. When they kicked on, I got angry. I got impatient. And the more that happened, the more stuck I stayed. So this is also going to kind of touch on that, on how we befriend our protective pieces. Okay, my friends, I hate to cut off the video like that, but this was just a small piece of our recent live meeting. If my videos here on YouTube resonate with you and you're ready to dive deeper, make sure you check out our Zoom meetings. And as a reminder, the doors are only open the first 7 days of each month. So today is May 7th. Doors are closed again until June 1st. So if you want to come join us, make sure you watch for the Zoom links to open up on June 1st.